In July 1976, radio operators around the globe noticed a strange disruption. Without warning, a sharp, repetitive knocking sound flooded the shortwave frequencies. It hammered out exactly 10 taps a second, overpowering everything else on the dial. The disruption spared no one. It hijacked international commercial broadcasts, interrupted aviation control towers, and jammed secure military channels. Because the source was unknown and the timing aligned perfectly with peak Cold War tensions, theories spiraled. Many feared the signal was an experimental Soviet weapon aimed directly at American citizens, designed to alter brainwaves or manipulate weather patterns to cause devastating droughts. Amateur radio operators formed a coalition they called the Russian Woodpecker Hunting Club. They fought back by tapping their ham radio microphones in synchronicity with the pulse, attempting to broadcast opposing signals to force the Soviet operators to change frequencies. By comparing signal arrival times across multiple continents, those civilian researchers narrowed down the source. Their triangulated lines converged on a single, unmapped patch of forest in northern Ukraine, barely 12 miles south of the town of Pripyat. What they had found was Duga-1. It was an over-the-horizon radar installation, a colossal wall of steel stretching nearly half a mile across and towering 150 meters high. The Soviets built it to detect incoming American ballistic missile launches. Traditional radar beams travel in straight lines. Because the Earth is round, a standard radar beam shoots straight out into space, completely missing objects like a low-fly missile hidden below the planet's curvature. To fix that blind spot, Duga used a technique called skywave propagation. It fired high-frequency radio waves upward, so they would bounce off the ionosphere, the upper layer of our atmosphere filled with charged particles. The signal reflected back down to Earth thousands of miles away, bouncing back and forth to locate targets over the horizon. Gathering the weak, returning signal required massive receiving antennas. The array uses what are known as Nadonenko dipoles, these distinctive horizontal birdcage structures. Their hollow, wide-diameter design allowed them to capture the broad bandwidth needed for wide-area radar tracking without collapsing under their own immense weight. The returning signal was incredibly faint, buried under layers of atmospheric static. To isolate a potential missile launch, the Soviets relied on the K-340A supercomputer, capable of 1 million operations per second. Technicians worked around the clock to filter the noise. Constructing this system cost an estimated 7 billion rubles, more than twice the price of the nearby nuclear power plant. The Soviet military gambled a massive portion of its budget on experimental physics, resulting in a steel monolith that dominated the Ukrainian skyline. A structure this large required a small army to run. The government built a restricted military town called Chernobyl II to house thousands of engineers. It had its own hospital, cinema, and hockey rink, yet it existed entirely off-grid, hidden from all public maps. Transmitting a signal capable of reaching across the globe required roughly 10 megawatts of power. To guarantee an uninterrupted supply, the radar array was strategically positioned next to the brand-new Chernobyl nuclear power plant, connected directly by dedicated heavy-duty transmission lines. But even with billions of rubles and dedicated nuclear power, the physics of skywave radar were wildly inconsistent. The system missed single missile launches roughly 10 to 20% of the time. The ionosphere itself was the biggest problem. It constantly shifts based on the time of day, the season, and the weather. Because the Soviet radar bounced its signals directly over the North Pole, solar winds and auroral activity routinely scrambled the reflections, blinding the operators. Despite projecting an aura of terrifying omnipresence, the Russian woodpecker was a heavily compromised machine. It was built on theoretical science that couldn't beat the weather, entirely reliant on a nuclear reactor that hid its own fatal design flaws. At 1:23 a.m. on April 26, 1986, a series of errors during a safety test at Reactor 4 triggered a steam explosion. The blast threw the 2,000-ton upper shield through the building's roof, exposing a graphite fire that pumped radioactive isotopes into the atmosphere. As the radioactive plume drifted southwest, alarms blared inside the radar's control rooms. The facility's ventilation systems began sucking contaminated air directly into the data centers. To prevent the computers from overheating and frying their delicate circuitry, the crew had no choice but to shut off the multi-million ruble system. operations stopped immediately. The highly trained computer engineers and military guards stationed at the Duga were quickly drafted into the disaster response. They joined the ranks of the liquidators, filling sandbags and shoveling radioactive debris around the fractured plant until they reached their maximum radiation limits. The government evacuated the secret city of Chernobyl too, sealing buildings and leaving the equipment to rust. By the time it was safe enough to consider reviving the site, the Soviet Union had successfully launched a network of satellites equipped with infrared telescopes. These satellites could track the heat of a missile exhaust directly from space, making the cumbersome, weather-dependent ground radar obsolete. The 150-meter-tall steel lattice now stands in total silence, overlooking a landscape of crumbling administrative buildings and encroaching forest. In the decades since the site was sealed, it has become little more than a rusting landmark within the boundaries of the exclusion zone. The Duga radar remains a towering monument to military ambition. A massive fortune was spent constructing an instrument to detect an apocalyptic threat from halfway across the world, only for the installation to be defeated by a catastrophic meltdown happening just a few miles away.